My parents sent me to prison for something I did not do. When the gates of Crestwood Correctional finally opened, they were waiting outside with soft smiles and carefully arranged grief on their faces. Cameras hovered behind them, hungry for reconciliation. But I did not stop. I did not hug them. I did not slow my pace. I walked straight past their outstretched arms and stepped into a black sedan with tinted windows. The version of me they betrayed no longer existed. The one who walked out had clarity, and clarity is far more dangerous than anger. The last morning inside Crestwood was unusually quiet. No shouting from the upper tier, no metal doors clanging in rhythm with frustration, just the sterile smell of disinfectant mixed with old concrete. I sat on the lower bunk and stared at the wall behind it. Thin scratch marks ran across the paint, faint but deliberate. I made them one day at a time with a broken plastic utensil. 1,095 lines, 3 years reduced to a private calendar. I traced the final mark with my finger and felt something colder than rage. Rage burns fast. This was different. This was controlled. Before prison, I was the founder and CEO of a cybersecurity firm that began in a cramped South Side Chicago garage with 2 folding chairs and a borrowed server rack. I built it through sleepless nights, impossible contracts, and risks that would have terrified anyone else in my family. By 32, the company valuation crossed 9 figures. The press called me a disruptor. My parents called me their miracle. Then they began calling me unstable. The night everything shifted was wrapped in rain and accusation. My sister-in-law, Naomi, was in the passenger seat during an argument that spiraled too fast. We argued about ownership, about equity, about loyalty. She said I cared more about servers and stock than blood. I told her she did not understand pressure. Words escalated. Then she grabbed the wheel. Tires screamed against wet asphalt. The car spun. Impact shattered glass and metal in the same breath. Airbags deployed. Silence followed. At the hospital, doctors spoke gently. They told her she had lost the baby. Grief pressed against my chest in a way I had never known. I sat beside her bed in shock. Then the narrative changed. She told police I had jerked the wheel in anger, that I caused the crash deliberately, that I lost control because of ego. The dash cam footage that would have shown the truth was suddenly corrupted, conveniently unrecoverable. My parents stood beside her. My younger brother, Dominic, testified that I had been volatile in board meetings, that I resented sharing authority. The story they told was clean and synchronized. Mine was complicated and emotional. The jury chose simplicity. The courtroom smelled of polished oak and performance. My mother cried with measured pauses. My father spoke with executive calm, listing my flaws like bullet points. Dominic avoided my eyes while reinforcing their narrative. Naomi, seated in a wheelchair, described fear in a trembling voice that felt rehearsed. The prosecution had little evidence beyond testimony, but testimony can be powerful when delivered in harmony. The gavel struck. 3 years. Prison did not break me in dramatic fashion. It eroded illusions slowly. You learn to observe systems. You learn how favors move. You learn how paper trails can either protect or bury you. I studied financial filings from the prison library. I requested corporate documents through legal channels. I mapped the changes in executive control that happened after my conviction. While they celebrated access to my shares, I documented patterns. 6 months into my sentence, they visited, a sterile room separated by reinforced glass. My father leaned forward and offered a deal disguised as compassion. Transfer controlling interest in the company to Dominic permanently. In exchange, they would support an early parole petition and help rebuild my image. It was a business negotiation disguised as family reconciliation. I declined without raising my voice. I saw disappointment not in losing me, but in losing leverage. By the time my release date approached, I already knew what they had done. Emergency executive authority filings, asset reallocation under temporary protective oversight, strategic dilution of voting shares during my incarceration. It looked legal on the surface. The timing told another story. When I stepped into that black sedan outside Crestwood, I was not alone. Seated inside was Elias Mercer, a litigation strategist my brother had tried and failed to retain years earlier. He nodded once as I closed the door. "We're ready," he said simply. The building we drove to in downtown Chicago had no external branding. Inside, it functioned as a private strategy suite.
Screens lined one wall. A woman stood near a central table reviewing digital forensic logs. Her name was Marin Caldwin, a financial investigator with a reputation for dismantling shell structures quietly. While I was incarcerated, they had been working. Marin showed me transaction timelines, emergency authority transfers signed within weeks of my conviction, consulting fees routed through a secondary holding company controlled by my parents, asset movements timed suspiciously close to public earnings reports, each irregularity highlighted in red. Then she placed a sealed evidence pouch on the table, recovered vehicle telemetry fragments from manufacturer cloud backups, partial data from the night of the crash, steering input metrics that did not match prosecution claims. It wasn't complete, but it was enough to reopen doubt. I signed the first motion that afternoon, petition to freeze executive movement pending forensic audit, request for independent review of conviction evidence based on newly surfaced telemetry logs, structured, methodical filings, no drama, no press statements. Weeks later, Dominic stood on stage announcing a $60 million acquisition partnership at a technology summit along the Chicago River. Cameras flashed, investors applauded. As he reached for the ceremonial pen, the screen behind him flickered. Corporate accounts flagged, asset freeze initiated under court order. The payment authorization declined, live on stage. The room shifted from applause to confusion in seconds. News alerts triggered across financial platforms. Mercer Technologies' assets frozen pending judicial review. Stock dipped in after-hours trading. His composure fractured just slightly. Cameras caught it. I watched from a secure feed in the strategy suite, not smiling, not celebrating, just observing correction beginning. The following morning, sealed medical records became public through lawful court disclosure. Naomi had suffered complications weeks before the accident. Independent specialists confirmed the miscarriage predated the crash. The narrative that secured my conviction began to unravel publicly. Reporters gathered outside my parents' North Shore home. Dominic confronted Naomi in the driveway as cameras rolled. Blame fractured their unity. Internal emails surfaced showing awareness of medical timelines. The illusion of coordinated innocence disintegrated. Dominic reached out quietly within days. He feared criminal exposure. In exchange for immunity considerations, he surrendered internal communications, wire transfers, and draft statements prepared before my trial, a map of orchestration. I did not attend the hearing where my conviction was overturned. I listened through a secure line. The judge cited new forensic data, suppressed evidence inconsistencies, and prosecutorial oversight failures, 3 years acknowledged as wrongful. Freedom felt procedural, not emotional. I filed civil claims immediately: wrongful conviction, corporate theft, defamation, intentional infliction of harm, structured litigation, not spectacle. The Chicago financial press dissected every development. The district attorney initiated investigations in perjury and financial misrepresentation. The same system that once failed me now corrected itself under scrutiny. Throughout it all, I remained absent from cameras. Silence unsettles people more than outrage. The first morning I walked back into headquarters, the lobby felt unfamiliar, renovated, rebranded. Employees stood straighter but said little. Respect does not need volume. My office faced Lake Michigan now, clean glass, minimal design. On one shelf sat a framed slab of chipped concrete, etched with 1,095 lines. No plaque, no explanation, just memory. Control structures were rewritten: shared signature authority, independent oversight committees, rotational audits. No single family line could dominate again. My parents' assets were liquidated under court judgment. Naomi faced charges. Dominic cooperated under agreement. Consequences unfolded without me in the room. I did not feel whole. I felt precise. They expected a reunion. They expected gratitude for staged forgiveness. Instead, they received procedure. My freedom was not a return. It was a recalibration, and the correction was only halfway complete.
Correction is never loud. It is deliberate. It moves through channels most people never notice until the result becomes unavoidable. After the conviction was formally overturned, Chicago did what it always does. It watched. It speculated. It moved on to the next scandal. But inside conference rooms and court filings, the real work began. The civil suit I filed was not emotional in tone, it was architectural, every paragraph structured to remove ambiguity. Wrongful convictions supported by newly authenticated vehicle telemetry, suppressed manufacturer data logs that contradicted sworn testimony, financial manipulation tied directly to emergency executive authority filings that had conveniently appeared within 2 weeks of sentencing. Each count was anchored in documentation, not outrage. Naomi's legal team attempted damage control first, public sympathy campaigns, carefully written statements about medical confusion and trauma-induced memory distortion. But memory distortion does not explain internal emails time-stamped before the trial, outlining contingency narratives. It does not explain financial transfers from corporate discretionary accounts into personal shell holdings during my incarceration. Dominic's cooperation became more detailed as the pressure mounted. He surrendered archived server backups showing draft board resolutions pre-written before the verdict. I had been removed on paper before the jury ever decided my fate. The structure was already in place. My conviction was not an accident, it was an opportunity. The district attorney's office opened a perjury review, quietly at first. Subpoenas went out under seal. Accountants were questioned. Medical consultants were re-interviewed. The telemetry fragment that Marin recovered became the cornerstone. Steering input pressure logged milliseconds before impact did not originate from my side of the vehicle. It was partial, but paired with metadata timestamps, it cracked the original narrative. The first indictment landed against Naomi for perjury and falsified testimony. Cameras waited outside the courthouse again. This time, the microphones were not angled toward me. She avoided eye contact as she entered. The performance had ended. My parents attempted reconciliation next, letters written in softened language, references to misguided protection and family misunderstanding. My father requested a private meeting through counsel. I declined. Clarity does not negotiate with revision. The financial case progressed faster than the criminal one. Independent forensic auditors completed their review of the company's restructuring during my incarceration. They documented unauthorized dilution of my controlling shares through accelerated board votes scheduled while I had no legal ability to respond. The votes were technically filed, but the timing created legal vulnerability. Intent matters in corporate law when pattern supports strategy. We pursued restitution aggressively. Liquidation of secondary properties purchased through redirected corporate accounts, recovery of executive bonuses issued under crisis leadership incentives, deferred compensation packages signed under questionable authority. Every reclaimed dollar was a documented correction. Dominic eventually entered a plea agreement tied to financial misconduct. He surrendered remaining voting shares and accepted a permanent prohibition from holding executive authority in publicly traded companies. His courtroom statement was subdued. No drama, just acknowledgement. Naomi's criminal case took longer. Medical experts testified that her pre-existing condition had triggered the miscarriage prior to the crash. The dashcam corruption report, once accepted without challenge, was revealed to have been labeled prematurely before full forensic recovery attempts. The original investigating officer admitted procedural oversight under cross-examination. It was not enough to convict her on every count, but it was enough to establish deliberate misrepresentation. My parents were not criminally charged, but civil liability attached firmly. They signed settlement agreements that transferred remaining family-held equity back to the corporation and relinquished board privileges permanently. Their reputational currency, once carefully maintained in Chicago's philanthropic circles, evaporated quietly. Through it all, I did not attend a single hearing in person. Instead, I focused on the structure inside headquarters. The top floor no longer operated on instinct and charisma. Governance protocols were codified into operational policy. No emergency executive authority could be triggered without dual independent review. Telemetry and security infrastructure inside company vehicles were upgraded with redundant cloud verification. Internal whistleblower channels were anonymized and protected by external counsel. Every vulnerability that had been exploited was sealed. I met with teams individually rather than hosting a triumphant town hall. Engineers, compliance officers, junior analysts. I listened to their concerns about instability, about press coverage, about job security.
Stability does not return through speeches, it returns through consistency. Investors watched cautiously at first. Quarterly earnings stabilized under conservative projections. Strategic partnerships were rebuilt slower than before. No more aggressive expansion fueled by ego. Growth grounded in durability. 6 months after reinstatement, the company's valuation recovered to pre-conviction levels. 12 months later, it exceeded them. The concrete slab with 1,095 etched lines remained on the shelf in my office. Visitors occasionally asked about it. I never explained. It was not a trophy, it was calibration. My mother attempted one final outreach through a handwritten note delivered by courier. She wrote about regret, about how pressure clouded judgment. She wrote that she missed the daughter she once praised publicly. I read it once. I did not respond. Forgiveness requires ownership. Ownership requires clarity. I had clarity. They had revision. The final civil judgment was issued 18 months after my release. Monetary damages were awarded. More importantly, the court's written opinion acknowledged coordinated manipulation. The language was clinical but decisive. It established precedent in corporate governance regarding incapacitated executive rights during criminal proceedings. The media cycle revived briefly to cover the ruling. Commentators framed it as a redemption arc. They misunderstood. This was never redemption. Redemption implies fault corrected. I had not erred. This was structural correction of narrative and power. One afternoon, I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. Winter clouds moved low across the skyline. Chicago looked indifferent as always. The city does not care about personal wars. It rewards resilience and precision. Elias entered with a thin folder. "Final transfer confirmations," he said. The last remaining contested assets had cleared. The litigation docket closed. I signed the acknowledgement and placed the pen down carefully. "Anything else?" I asked. He shook his head once. "It's complete." Complete is a misleading word. Nothing truly resets to original form. It evolves. My parents sold their North Shore property months later. They relocated quietly. Dominic took a consulting role outside Illinois under supervision clauses tied to his agreement. Naomi avoided public appearances entirely. I did not monitor them. I did not need to. Instead, I expanded the company's oversight division. We launched a public initiative focused on ethical executive governance, seminars on transparency during legal vulnerability, safeguards against opportunistic board restructuring. What happened to me would not become a template for anyone else. At the annual shareholders meeting, I spoke briefly. No dramatic references to the past, no personal anecdotes. I discussed accountability, risk mitigation, and systemic integrity. Investors applauded politely. That was enough. Late one evening, long after staff had left, I turned off the lights in my office and let the city glow reflect against the glass. The 1,095 lines caught faint illumination. They no longer felt like lost time. They felt like earned discipline. Prison had taken 3 years. Betrayal had taken illusion. Correction returned authority. People sometimes ask whether I feel vindicated. Vindication suggests emotional release. What I feel is equilibrium. The version of me who once trusted proximity without verification is gone. The one standing here understands that systems must protect against sentiment, that loyalty without oversight is vulnerability. The gates of Crestwood opened once. They will never close behind me again. My parents waited outside expecting reunion. They received recalibration instead. The story they constructed collapsed under documentation. The narrative they weaponized dissolved under procedure. And the life they attempted to control now operates beyond their reach. The account is balanced. The structure is fortified. The correction stands. And forward is the only remaining direction. If this story stayed with you, if it made you think about power, trust, or resilience, then share your thoughts. Tell me what part hit hardest. And if you believe in stories where justice is methodical and strength is quiet, make sure you like and subscribe for more. There are always more stories to tell, and some of them begin the moment it seems lost.